This 1918 Cadillac is very special. It is one of about 2,500 that were used in various duties during World War I, but this is the only one with a completely known service record. This particular Cadillac is a little unusual in that it literally is a consumer car.
In the early days of the U.S. military adopting the motor vehicle, they picked a little bit of everything and anything from the civilian market, including the Cadillac, which was actually one of the official vehicles of the United States military in World War I, this being the only one known to still exist.
The U.S. enters the war on April 6, 1917. In July of 1917, the military tests cars down in Marfa, Texas. It puts them through a 2,000-mile endurance test in the desert, and the Cadillac prevails.
Cadillac, like a lot of Detroit automakers, had seen the war clouds on the horizon and realized that things were going to change rather quickly. The company did get fairly heavily involved in wartime production, especially once the U.S. had committed to being a part of the conflict.
In 1916, there were hardly any vehicles being used by the U.S. Army. There were no standardized vehicles at all, and the push to go to World War I really created that need. And the U.S. military understood the concept of standardization, but the quickness with which we ended up in that war and ended up overseas meant that there wasn't time to develop a standardized vehicle.
When we think of Cadillac today, I think the great tradition of innovation in that company is its lasting legacy. They introduced the self-starter, the electric starter, and with the electric start also came the advent of electric lights in automobiles. For the 1915 model year, they introduced the first mass-produced V8 engine, not necessarily the first V8, but the first that was being built on a large scale. So all of those things are to the company's credit. Cadillacs by 1917, 1918 were clearly now luxury vehicles. The one thing that set Cadillacs apart from other vehicles of the time is size. And I think that size is what made them appealing as staff cars in World War I.
The Type 57 Cadillac and the Type 57 limousine were chosen as the officers' cars.
Automobiles had been used in warfare prior to World War I, but I think World War I demonstrated their abilities on a much larger scale, and the Cadillac would have been particularly well suited. Of course, could carry more people, could also make its way through the mud and the rough terrain of the battlefront. The engine's also much larger. This one, the story is unusual because it was purchased by a private owner, Reverend Dr. John Hopkins Dennison.
He's an author, and he's a congregational minister in New York. On August 11th, 1917, Dr. John Hopkins Dennison sails to France for patriotic duty with this car.
He went over to serve the YMCA and help find rest and relocation areas, sort of areas in the rear lines where soldiers could go and relax in between engagements.
This car has a bullet hole shot through it right in front of Dr. Dennison's feet. That was likely sustained at the Second Battle of the Marne. Allied victory pivots on the Second Battle of the Marne. And this car was at ground zero for that moment.
When the war was over, many of the Cadillacs were either just sold as surplus and stayed right there in France, or they may have been scrapped. But his came back home with it. He continued to use it after the war, so that's the reason it escaped the scrapper's torch.
Over 2,200 Cadillacs were pressed into service during World War I. All of the other cars were lost to time, and this is the only remaining intact example that survives. And that's, I think, profoundly important.
It tells not just the story of World War I, not just the story of Cadillac, but the story of how America went to war in that First World War